Good evening. This is the January 28, 2026 meeting of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority Community Advisory Committee, or CAC. I'm Kat Siegel, chair of the CAC. Our vice chair is Naj Daniels. I'd like to thank our clerk, Amy Sayung, and our operator, Daniela Rible, for this meeting. Madam Clerk, please do a roll call to ensure we have quorum, and then please read your announcement about public comment.
CAC members, when I call your name, please say present to ensure quorum. Member Bars? Bars absent. Vice Chair Daniels?
Daniels present.
Daniels present. Member Ford? Ford absent. Member Imadadeen?
Aye.
Imadadeen present. Member Kim?
Kim present.
Kim present. Member Levine?
Levine present.
Levine present. Member Margarita?
Margarita present.
Margarita present. Member Milford Rosales?
Milford Rosales present.
Milford Rosales present. Member Ortega?
Ortega present.
Ortega present. Chair Siegel?
Siegel present.
Siegel present. Chair, we have quorum also. Public comment will be available for each item on this agenda via telephone by calling one of the numbers listed on the front of the agenda or joining the meeting through the Zoom link. Once you join, you will be able to listen to the meeting as a participant. To make public comment on an item when the item is called, members of the public participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9. Do not press *9 again or you will be removed from the queue. When you are asked to unmute yourself, press *6 or the unmute button to unmute yourself. The live operator will advise that you are allowed 2 minutes to speak. When your 2 minutes are up, we will move on to the next caller. Best practices are to speak slowly, clearly, and turn down the volume of any televisions or radios around you. Thank you. That concludes my announcement.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll move on to item 2. This is the chair's report. Happy 2026, everyone. The Transportation Authority Board had its first meeting of the year on January 27th, where they held elections for chair and vice chair for 2026, just like we'll do tonight. The board reelected Chair Melgar and Vice Chair Sauter. Thank you to Amy for sending the CAC the Executive Director's Report and a link to the agency's 2025 Annual Report, both of which were presented at the board meeting. As evidenced by the annual report, the Transportation Authority has an ambitious work program, and the CAC has the opportunity to weigh in on many of those efforts. Tonight's very full agenda is a reflection of that. I'd like to appreciate in advance staff from the SFCTA who are here with us tonight to present an update on the local revenue measure, item 13, that is being developed to help complement a potential 2026 regional transit measure, both with the intent of stabilizing and improving our core transit systems as they pivot to new post-pandemic financial models. In order to get to all of these agenda items, I ask CAC members to please be concise and seek to limit yourselves to 2 questions per agenda item if possible in asking questions, and also for staff to be concise in your presentations and responses to CAC member questions. Moving on to meeting management notes, CAC members, staff, and public commenters in the room, please be sure to speak directly into the microphone so folks attending virtually can hear you. CAC members and folks in the hearing room, please turn off or silence all electronic devices and computer notifications during the meeting. That's it for announcements. Are there any questions or comments from CAC members on the chair's report? Is there anyone in the hearing room wishing to give public comment on the chair's report? Not seeing any. Operator, is there any remote public comment on the chair's report?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great, thank you so much. We will move on to item 3, election of chair and vice chair for 2026. At the November CAC meeting, the CAC made nominations for the 2026 officers, nominating myself as chair and member Naj Daniels for vice chair. The nominees have provided the clerk with a brief statement of qualifications and objectives for today's elections, which are included in the agenda materials. Let's take public comment before voting. Is there any comment in the hearing room on elections? Not seeing any. Operator, is there any remote public comment on item 3?
There's no remote public comment for item 3.
Great. Then we just need a motion and no second this evening before voting on nominations. Would someone like to make a motion to elect the chair? Moved by Member Imaduddin, and by Member Margarita. Madam Clerk, could we please have a roll call vote, please?
On the motion to elect Kat Siegel as chair for 2026, Member Bars absent, Vice Chair Daniels.
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford absent. Member Imaduddin.
Imaduddin, aye.
Imaduddin, aye. Member Kim.
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita.
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales.
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 8 ayes. The motion carries.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate your continued trust and support. I definitely don't take it for granted. Okay, for Vice Chair, could I get a motion to elect Member Daniels as Vice Chair? Moved by Member Margarita. Moved by a lot of people. Okay, Madam Clerk, could we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to elect Najuwanda Daniels as Vice Chair for 2026, Member Bars absent, Vice Chair Daniels.
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford absent, Member Imaduddin.
Imaduddin, aye.
Imaduddin, aye. Member Kim.
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita.
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales.
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 8 ayes. The motion carries.
Congratulations, Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, fellow members.
All right. We will now move on to the consent agenda. Items 4 through 7 comprise the consent agenda. Staff is not planning to present, but is available to answer questions. Do any CAC members have any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Member Kim?
Thank you, Chair. I have one question, agenda item 6. It says CT, we are no longer recommending prioritizing by project type. In swing, so a complete goal of the creating a diverse program of project. Yeah, there's another repetition of this, but can I ask you explain the background why we no longer recommend this?
Would you like a presentation on this item, or just answer the question?
I think just answer the question if possible. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So in the past, first of all, this is an opportunity to remind everyone that this grant program exists. The Air District sets eligibility for all the projects that we're able to fund, and then every year the board needs to adopt criteria to guide staff when we get applications on how to prioritize them. So in the past, we have had a priority by project type among those eligible project types. So we said that zero emissions non-vehicle projects would be our top priority, followed by shuttle projects, followed by other types of projects. But we also had a goal to have we want to encourage really innovative projects and projects that we might not be able to fund with other sources. But we also had a goal of having a diverse program of projects. So that created a sort of conflict between those two goals. And we also, because the rules are very strict, we often struggle to find enough projects to use all the money that are eligible. So we thought that this, having that prioritization by project type, didn't make as much sense, was not necessary to have a well-run program. We thought it would be better to remove it.
Yeah, so the criteria not necessarily define like, project type. So that doesn't mean we don't fund those projects, but, using more broad, universal criteria so we can prioritize properly without limit, right? Am I understanding correct?
Yeah, basically, I would say it's a subtle difference because there are still very strict eligibility requirements for the types of projects. But yeah, so it's not changing the types of projects that we are able to fund.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from members on the consent agenda? Not seeing any. Is there any public comment in the room on the consent agenda? Not seeing any. Operator, is there any remote public comment on the consent agenda?
There is no remote public comment on the consent agenda.
Great. May I have a motion and a second to approve items 4 and 6 on the consent agenda? Moved by Member Levine, seconded by Member Milford Rosales. Madam Clerk, could we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve items 4 and 6 on the consent agenda, Member Bars absent. Vice Chair Daniels?
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford absent. Member Imadadine?
Imadadine, aye.
Imadadine, aye. Member Kim?
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine?
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita?
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales?
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega?
Aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel?
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 8 ayes. The motion is approved. I'm sorry, the consent agenda is approved.
Great. Move on to item 8, adopt a motion of support to allocate $21 million and appropriate $200,000 in Prop L funds with conditions for 10 requests. This presentation will be delivered by Deputy Director for Policy and Programming, Anna Lafort. Welcome, Ms. Lafort, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I just would like to start the item with a reminder that we have pulled the Treasure Island on-island shuttle startup request for further discussion with the Treasure Island Development Authority. So the recommendation that's shown on the screen, this title slide, has been revised accordingly. So it differs slightly from your packet materials. All right, so let's get into the request. The first request is from the SFMTA for quick build improvements on 4 Muni Forward corridors. This is the 1 California, the 22 Fillmore, the T3rd Surface Route, and the 28 19th Avenue. The work is in support of speed, reliability, and safety benefits and includes stop spacing adjustments, signal retiming, and transit signal priority, turn restrictions, and curb changes. And the scope of work that the project includes is to approximately 10 to 15 intersections on each of the 4 project corridors, and these are elements that consist primarily of paint, signage, and signal timing adjustments. The next request, there are 5 requests that are from Caltrain tonight. Caltrain is seeking a combined total of $5 million in Prop L funds, and this is from the annual placeholder for San Francisco's member contribution to the Caltrain capital budget for state of good repair projects. As a reminder, Prop L funds help to offset the SFMTA and City and County of San Francisco's local match contribution to the Caltrain budget, and these are system-wide projects that the 3 Caltrain joint APB, Joint Power Board members all support. I'm going to lightly touch on the more routine state of good repair requests given the long agenda. And so the first request is for $200,000, and this is for maintenance at the Central Equipment Maintenance and Operations Facility, and it's to support inspections and maintenance and repairs and resurfacing of the shop floor. This next request is for $1 million to support the purchase and replacement of equipment that is essential for maintaining Caltrain track. And another $1 million in work activities to maintain the Caltrain tracks in a state of good repair. And this work includes rail and cross ties, special track components, rail grinding, and ballast purchase and placement. This next request is for a total of $300,000, and that is $80,000 for design, $220,000 for construction, and this is to rehabilitate weep holes in tunnels that are in San Francisco in order to improve the drainage system. And weep holes are small openings that allow water to drain, and the scope will ream or enlarge or smooth the diameter of about 2,200 weep holes over about 8,800 foot stretch of track and tunnel. This next request is from Caltrain, and this is for $2.5 million for the construction of the Guadalupe River Bridge replacement project. There are 2 rail bridges over Guadalupe River that have exceeded their useful life and are in need of replacement to avoid slow orders and weight limits for Caltrain and freight operations. We have previously funded this project with about $3.8 million in Prop K funds towards design and construction, and there have been significant cost increases on the project for a variety of reasons. And we have advocated for greater oversight on the project, which Caltrain has agreed to. And so our recommendation includes a condition for Caltrain continuing to conduct the quarterly oversight meetings with project funding partners that include the Transportation Authority. The funding plan for the project includes a total of $10 million in Prop L funds, so you will see this project again over the next it will be a total of 4 years, over the next 3 years, to fulfill this commitment. And as a contextual note, in parallel to the implementation of the projects that are funded by this allocation, including this subject project, Caltrain is undertaking a program of work during calendar year 2026 to advance Caltrain governance, and that consists of the consistent with the motion approved by the Caltrain Joint Powers Board on January 8th. We anticipate bringing a funding request to the CAC for this work as soon as next month. This next request is from the SFMTA for paratransit services to persons with disabilities in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Prop L funds will be used for the paratransit broker contract in the current fiscal year, 25-26, for services that include taxi, pre-scheduled vans, inter-county trips, group van service to senior centers, stop-around shuttle, Van Go shuttle programs, as well as the wheelchair accessible ramp taxi incentive program and essential trip card program. Our recommendation includes a waiver to the Prop L policy to allow funds to be used for retroactive expenses starting since July 1 of 2025. SFMTA delayed its submittal of the request while it was focused on an agency-wide directive to identify and implement cost reduction measures across contracted professional services, including the paratransit program. Confirming the annual cost for the program required substantial SFMTA staff time and capacity within the Accessible Services Division. In prior years, the budget showed the maximum contract amount, but this budget shows the actual expected cost based on historical data and the cost-saving measures. Next request is for SFMTA to implement a project at the request of the District 5 office for neighborhood program funds to implement traffic calming treatments to discourage speeding and improve street safety throughout the district. Potential locations are shown in the enclosure to your packet in the allocation request form, and they were informed by a survey conducted by the District 5 office. The treatments may include painted safety zones, speed humps or cushions, and raised crosswalks. I think this is the last request is for the Mission Alamany Community-Based Transportation Plan for $200,000 from the Transportation Authority from the Prop L Equity Priority Transportation Program, which we created in part to leverage Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, community-based transportation planning funds, which we receive as the congestion management agency for San Francisco. The funds are intended to support community planning in equity priority communities to, among other goals, set up pipelines of projects that can then compete for other discretionary grant programs. We're seeking $200,000 in Prop L funds for this project in District 11, and this will leverage $370,000 in MTC funds. Through the study, we will engage community members, including convening a community advisory group composed of community leaders and agency staff, and collaborative decision-making to address transportation safety, access, and circulation challenges, and gaps focused around the Mission Street corridor between San Jose and Silver Avenues, the Outer Mission, Balboa Park, Crocker Amazon, and Excelsior neighborhoods. And Commissioner Chen has expressed support for this request. So again, and I'll just pull up the project area slide so you can see a map of the study area. And that concludes my presentation, and I would like to just remind folks of the action before you tonight is to approve the funds that do not include the Treasure Island Shuttle project.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. Member Milford Rosales.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm very excited about the 5-minute network corridors. I use multiple of the transit lines in that study, or in that plan. I'm curious, with the upcoming bridge replacement plans that we have for the T3rd, is there going to be any coordination here on the quick build improvements with like with regard to like T3rd service south of that bridge, Nice Lakes Creek?
I think I would best have the project manager address. And let me see.
Just in light of time constraints tonight, it's all right if that's something that can be sent by email. I'm just curious about any coordination there, because I know many people rely on the T, and this can make it significantly better, but also like with that upcoming project, I'm curious if there's any coordination.
If there are other questions, oh, here we go. Here's Michael Rhodes from SFMTA.
Maybe it's through the chair. If you might want to go to another question, we'll get his audio fixed and then come back to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Member Kim?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for presentation. I have a question, paratransit operation. This curiosity. Right now, our regular Muni bus facilitate wheelchair as well. So when we operate paratransit, is there any restriction or how to routing those tour? For example, someone want to go to certain spot, but it's 38R or other Muni cover that route. Is it allowed, or in the case they recommend customer use regular Muni or paratransit? How that works? Those things.
And I'd like to have, since some of the programs have restrictions based on your ADA eligibility while others do not, but let me have the paratransit program manager, Jonathan Chang, address your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Chang. I'm the paratransit manager for SFMTA. There are no restrictions in terms of where anyone can go on the SF paratransit service. So if someone happens to go to a destination where another bus line runs along that route, there are no restrictions in terms of how someone uses paratransit, nor restrictions to their destination, as long as it's within the same service area as SFMTA.
Sorry, so there is a restriction. Sorry, I missed the answer.
Yeah, sorry, there's no restrictions on the location.
So there's
Yeah,
no restriction. Okay,
yeah.
got it. Yeah, I mean um, yeah, we have a great paratransit service, and also the Muni provide like kind of cover overlap. I don't have issue, but nowadays, in the future, maybe we can think about it like cost effectiveness. Sometimes I don't know which way is better. We kind of guide people use more paratransit, or we guide people use more the munis. Yeah, that's kind of a question. Do you have any plan? Is more disabled people use more transit service, or you regular muni service? Trying to include on existing service.
Yeah, so in order to qualify for paratransit, individuals have to have a disability that prevents them from using the Muni service some or all the time. So there are some people who can't use Muni for other trips, but there are some people who can use Muni for certain trips. I will say we did a survey in April of last year, and we found that about a third of our riders have used Muni in the past month. Um, and we also do have a mobility management team, which helps individuals kind of who have difficulties with transportation to identify which transportation services best meet their needs. So there might be certain trips where paratransit might be a better option, but there might be certain trips where they could maybe use Muni, and they may need maybe some assistance with travel training, learning how to use the accessible features on the bus, figuring out which bus routes to take, those tools in order to be able to successfully use Muni. So we do have services beyond just the transportation services to help people, seniors and people with disabilities, to better utilize the network of transportation in San Francisco.
And thank you for the answer.
Member Ford?
Thanks for the presentation. The item that stood out to me was the Caltrain bridge replacement on the Guadalupe River, and multiple funding requests, and also the partnership with the freight railroads. And I'm wondering where we stack in the obligation list to fill the hole that's been generated by the cost overruns, whether the freight railroads are partnering with us on filling the hole on the cost overruns, and whether that's bringing them to the table to partner with things like level boarding on Caltrain for these stations.
I'd like to ask the Caltrain staff member, Michelle Stewart, to address that question. Thanks.
Thank you. We have our project manager for the project online today as well. So Angie, I don't know if you're able to jump on as well. I think we have some of the answers. We may have to follow up in terms of some of the freight coordination, but I'll let Angie jump in first.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yes, we do coordinate with the freight carriers with UP. They are funding a portion of the project. So that coordination has been done. Does that answer the question?
I think the question was also in relation. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
A portion is how much of the portion, and then also really where we stack. Are all of these funders contributing equally to the cost overruns, or are we the funders that are bringing the extra money to the table?
So I'm trying to keep it sort of high level enough. As you can imagine, a project of this scale, which is $171 million, it has a lot of different funding sources. And since we've been chipping away at this over a number of years and developing the funding plan by moving a lot of money around, doing everything we could to leverage resources that Caltrain already had to try to fill the funding gap on the project, we have had to approach all three counties. And so all three counties have been working with us to fill the funding gap. VTA has made their commitment at their last May, their board to apply their contributions to the project. SMCTA just took their item to their board. That was actually just earlier this month, to add their contributions for this year as well as next year. So this is sort of the remaining piece is coming to SFCTA to make this request. So definitely all three counties have been integral to our ability to fill the funding gap. And this is, a project that has been a great priority for the agency because it connects, it's an integral bridge connecting our system. So hopefully that at a high level addresses it. If there's interest in seeing the actual funding breakdown in terms of the UP contribution versus SFCTA, we're happy to provide that too.
And if I could interject that it is included in the packet of materials in the enclosure to your packet on page 32 as part of the allocation request. There's a funding plan for the project cost, and it reflects the member contributions, which are relatively
Yes. I forgot that we put all that together in there last week. Yes. So yes, it's yes. Thank you.
Through the chair, Anna, can you speak briefly to why they're coming back multiple times to us instead of once?
Sure. Other members, other Joint Power Board members are providing their contributions up front. The Transportation Authority, SFCTA, is providing our contribution over time so that we could also continue to fund other system-wide state of good repair projects on an annual basis. And the project is able to accommodate that cash flow, and so we are able to fund both Guadalupe as well as other state of good repair projects along the corridor.
Member Ortega?
Yes, I also wanted to ask about the freight and the Caltrain project, and I just wanted to make sure I understood a few things. First, I believe in the packet, as I was quickly rereading this, the budget jumped from 65 million to almost 170 million. Did I get that correctly?
Andy, do you want to jump in and sort of provide a background on that?
Yep, sure. This project did encounter significant cost overruns, primarily related to increased conditions that were not initially expected from the environmental permitting perspective. So the project did begin construction in 2023 and had to pause and go through a whole new permitting process for the environmental permitting aspect. And so during that time, there was also delays to the project. So the delays plus the increased conditions on the project significantly increased the cost.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And then I also wanted to ask a little bit more about the freight contribution, because so you have a funding sources per phase with a nice little percentage breakout. And I think the question that I have is, you have listed as other, and I'm just having a hard time finding this. What is the reallocation of a PIRCP bond funding? Because you listed out the TA contributions, the Caltrain fund, the federal funding, the state fund, a regional fund, and then under other, which is where I would assume you'd list any freight company partnerships, you have PIRCP bond funding, and I want to know what that is.
So those were bond funds that we had access to, that we were using to fund a variety of projects, a variety of Caltrain projects. We already had some funding programmed to this project. However, due to the significance of the funding gap and the cost overrun on the project, we had to revisit that list and try to defer as much of the money from other projects to this critical effort. And this was part of the strategy to try to limit what we were having to come to our county partners to request. So this was, somewhat of a challenging effort, because of course we had to evaluate various project priorities. And because of the significance of this effort and the criticality of the bridge, we had to do whatever was possible to fill the funding gap. And so what that really reflects is what sort of what we could do as Caltrain to try to bear the pain of these cost overruns. And so so that's what the 45 million there represents.
Okay, great. That's really helpful because that kind of makes me go, rates given 1.3 million, if I can read this correctly.
So it's actually the UPR settlement agreement was 4.1 million in total. The other this SJRC, that's the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, they operate the ACE service, so they do utilize the network as well. That was their contribution. But yeah, the Union Pacific Railroad settlement agreement contribution is the 4.1 that we
That's 4%. And so I think I am agreeing with Member Ford's question. I would like to understand at what point the freight companies who also use this line are also going to bear more of the cost. Because, and I don't know what's standard, and of course there could always be other things that are different, but you have had a budget that went from $65 million to $170 million. 4% of that is currently being held by the freight. You've done a lot of work, I can tell, to get this approved, fixed up, but 27% is coming from federal funding, various TA contributions. You're using Measure RR and the capital reserve to get in here. Like, there's a lot of stuff. And so I guess that is my question and can be answered at a later point, but I echo Member Ford's question based on these percentages.
Okay.
Yeah, like, it's a legitimate question. Like, who owns this bridge? If freight gets to use it, but they've only contributed 4%, they don't own the bridge, too. Like, Caltrain should have priority. Like, there's a lot of questions that are open from this. We can have a further discussion offline. I know we have a lot of topics, but I would just like to echo Member Ford's questions about this.
We can go back and do our homework and provide a response on that in terms of the ownership. I believe the bridge ownership versus the track ownership, there's some nuance there that we can respond back to you on.
Awesome, thank you. Was the project manager for the P3rd, was it the Muni Forward 5-minute network, able to their audio?
I can try again. Can folks hear me?
Oh yes, we can hear you now.
Fantastic.
Can you remember what the question was?
I think so, but if there needs to be a follow-up after my answer, that's totally great too. I'm Michael Rhodes, Transit Priority Manager for the SFMTA. I think just generally speaking, the improvements on the T3rd that we're anticipating are going to be in the nature of signal timing and optimizing transit signal priority. We think that can happen pretty quickly with relatively minimal construction disruption, really none. So basically, I think that we're aware of the bridge closure on 3rd Street and of the timing of that, and that's sort of been shifting a bit. We expect that our work will be done well in advance of that, so any improvements will be realized well before that. And I apologize for any distractions in the background.
So, just very quick follow-up. Thank you very much for answering the first part of if you're aware and kind of planning with that. Since this will all be done right before the bridge closure, that's going to be taking out service along much of the T for at least a year, is the last estimate I've seen. Will these improvements, will those still be usable for for buses that might run along that route in a substituted partial route, or will we still be able to leverage these along the route, or are we making a lot of great improvements and then shelving it all for a year because of the bridge construction?
Yeah, I think short answer is these are pretty focused on the rail side. Rail TSP is very particular to, it's different equipment than bus transit signal priority. It has different signals that the trains that operators are looking to. So we may be able to look to ways to optimize signal timing during that shutdown for buses and further optimize, but these are separate. That said, we think we'll get 30 years of benefit out of this on rail, so there will be a year where we're not seeing that benefit. But yeah, I think safe to say that this doesn't directly help bus operations.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks for adding how long these improvements are going to be useful. That's very helpful information as well. Thanks.
Great. If there are no other questions or comments from members, is there any public comment in the room on this item? Not seeing any. Is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great. May I have a motion on the revised staff recommendation and a second to approve item 8? Moved by Member Milford Rosales, seconded by Vice Chair Daniels. Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call vote?
On the motion to allocate $21,042,500 and appropriate $200,000 in Prop L funds with conditions for 9 requests, Member Bars. Bars absent. Vice Chair Daniels.
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford.
Ford, aye.
Ford, aye. Member Imadadeen.
Imadadeen, aye.
Imadadeen, aye. Member Kim.
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita.
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales.
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 9 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. We'll move on to item 9, which is an allocation of $12.5 million in Prop L funds for the portal project engineering phase. And we have a presentation from Rail Program Manager Jesse Kaler. Welcome, Mr. Kaler.
Good evening, CAC members. Jesse Kaler, Rail Program Manager at the TA, to present this item, which is a recommendation to allocate funds to the Transway Joint Powers Authority to support the continued advancement of the portal project. And it's helping me get the slides up, I hope. While that's happening, I'll also note that we're joined this evening on the Zoom by TJPA staff, Alfonso Rodriguez, who serves as project director for the portal. Thanks for being here, Alfonso. Yep.
It's worth the wait, guys.
Yes. All right, so the TJPA is the lead agency for, now why are we not, oh, it did advance. The TJPA is the lead agency for the portal project, which will construct a tunnel to bring Caltrain and future California high-speed rail into the Salesforce Transit Center in the heart of downtown. The transit center was constructed with a subterranean train box, which is awaiting the construction of this project. The TJPA is implementing the project in partnership with the Transportation Authority, the 2 rail operators, Caltrain and High Speed Rail, the city and county, and the MTC, under the terms of a 6-agency agreement, which was executed last year. The Transportation Authority is an active partner in this project over many years, and that includes serving on the project's governance bodies, including at the policy, executive management, and technical levels as described in that 6-agency agreement. We also, under that agreement, lead or co-lead certain project development tasks working in partnership with the TJPA and the other partners. This includes work on project funding and advocacy, governance implementation, and ridership forecasting, among other efforts. Finally, we conduct enhanced oversight of the project on behalf of San Francisco, reflecting the project's scale and risks, with that oversight being a local complement to the federal oversight provided by the Federal Transit Administration. The portal project's current schedule targets opening the project for passenger service in 2036, with this date being subject to our work together to complete the project's funding plan, allowing it to fully move into the construction phase. The single biggest funding source for the project is a $3.4 billion funding share from the Federal Transit Administration through its Capital Investment Grant Program. Currently, the project is advancing through what is called the engineering phase of that FTA process, during which the TJPA must complete various pre-construction activities, as well as secure full commitment of all non-FTA funding. In 2023, TJPA estimated the capital cost of the project as $8.25 billion. Of this amount, about $729 million represents the previous and completed expenditure to construct the train box in the basement of the Salesforce Transit Center. In July of last year, TJPA staff presented an indicative update to this cost estimate with a value of approximately $7.6 billion, with modifications that reflected agreed scope changes supported by ourselves and the other partnering agencies, as well as other adjustments to the cost assumptions within the estimate. The project's cost estimate as a whole will be formally updated in the future as part of the process to secure Federal Transit Administration funds through what is known as a full funding grant agreement. With respect to funding plan as a whole, there are significant local, regional, and state funds that have already been committed to the project. Completing the funding plan and closing the remaining funding gap will require securing planned state funding of at least approximately $1 billion and confirming additional local and regional funding sources to support the project's funding plan. The TJPA has prepared, working with the partners, a 3-year scope of work for advancing the project toward full funding and construction, including work to acquire remaining right-of-way that the project needs to be constructed and operate. This scope of work includes all those activities necessary to fulfill federal requirements under the Federal Transit Administration's grant process. Excluding those right-of-way acquisition costs, this work will cost approximately $235 million over a 3-year period, supported through a combination of local, regional, and state funds. Finally, moving to this year and the request before you, the TJPA has requested $12.5 million in Prop L funds to support activities of this engineering phase during the current fiscal year. As part of this request, TJPA has requested an allowance for retroactive expenditures starting November 1st under this year's grant, as well as a request for retroactivity for about $267,000 on last year's grant. We recommend granting these waivers to allow TJPA to have maximum flexibility in managing what we call color of money, with those color of money considerations providing less flexibility for some of their other available funding sources. Collectively, this will allow the project to make the most timely continued progress under the FTA process, while also drawing down available regional and state funds. So with that, the recommendation before you is to adopt a motion of support to allocate $12.5 million in Prop L funds for activities this year and make an amendment to last year's grant to permit the retroactivity that I just described. With that, both myself and Director Rodriguez are happy to answer questions.
Great, thanks so much for the presentation. Member Ford.
Hoping not to go first. Did I understand the first slide, that budget slide, that the expected cost of the portal has gone down since the first time we did it? And how did we do that? We don't see that often in this body. And then the other question I had that stood out to me was the consultant cost, looking relatively high, and whether that was considered against an in-house position instead of a third-party consultant.
Great questions, Member Ford. I'll start on the first one and then ask my colleague to add in and perhaps also take the second question with respect to a state of practice for consultant expenditures for a program like this. With respect to the cost estimate, yes, we don't typically get to come before you and demonstrate a significant reduction in capital cost. This does actually reflect the hard work of all of the agencies working together to refine the scope of the project and to actually be in a place where we could recommend a series of very significant changes to scope that help reduce costs. These include things like significantly reducing the size of the new underground 4th and Townsend station adjacent to the current terminus of Caltrain to remove 2 of 3 platforms at that location, ensuring that Caltrain is able to serve the station in the future and that high-speed rail would be able to pass through. In addition, with respect to the future Pennsylvania Avenue Extension project, which I've been before you in other meetings, we worked with TJPA to reduce what we call the tunnel stub, which is intended to support the future construction of that project. We reduced it in a fashion that still would allow us to deliver that project in the future without unduly impacting Caltrain operations, but save a just really significant area of excavation for this project. We also were able to work with the project team to realize some cost savings because when the estimate was submitted to the FTA in 2023, the first step on this slide shown here, FTA required some very conservative assumptions on escalation in the early years. This was right at the heart of when inflation economy-wide was very significant. And while there was still escalation in that period, it was not at the 5% plus level that FTA had demanded. And because we had gotten through those years, the cumulative impact of putting the actual escalation into the estimate is quite significant. The last thing I'll note is, yes, there will continue to be upward pressure for various reasons on the estimate. We also, at this level of development, are carrying a pretty significant contingency, which we hope to continue to work together through the risk management process, through things like acquiring right-of-way and doing enabling work, such as utility relocation, to help manage the ongoing pressure on this cost over time as we move forward. So, Alfonso, if you wanted to jump in on anything on that first question and perhaps take the second question with respect to the magnitude of consultant costs and how TJPA works with its consultants, I would appreciate that.
Certainly, thank you. Actually, Jesse, can you folks hear me okay? Okay, I'm assuming you can. I think you answered the first question well. You captured the scope elements that we were able to work with agency partners through value engineering processes to, adjust our scope, our cost estimate appropriately, and as you stated, to actualize escalation that we perhaps were a little bit overstated based on a heated market at the time we needed to submit the estimate, when in fact, some of our specialty consultants, economic forecasters, were telling us it's going to turn, but we couldn't point to it yet, so that we were able to actualize that lower escalation value. A combination was about $683 million of overall cost reduction. As far as the second question, I think it has to do with pro services. I'm not sure what you're looking at, because we in our cost estimate, we carry non-construction personnel related services. We call it, I guess we do call it pro services. But I do need to point out that in that cost category that FTA asks us to report to, it's all agency costs. It includes, let's see, I think it is other professional services. So, okay. Yeah, I see which table you're looking at.
I think, and Member Ford, if you want to clarify your question, I also suspect it has to do with the specific work that our Prop L funds are supporting this year, which is largely for TJPA costs for the PMCM, which is our program management and general engineering costs.
Yeah, to clarify, I'm looking at slide 7 where it says $12 million in funding supporting consultant for $9.5 million and $3.1 million. And if I've understood your answer correctly, you're saying that those are staff on TJPA, so this is just effectively an internal agency to agency transfer, or are these like McKinsey and Company?
It's not McKinsey. These are consultants that are conducting design work largely. That's the 3.1 and program management for the project. So I'll ask Alfonso to jump in here as well. But for a program at this scale, for an agency at the size of TJPA, a very significant level of consultant support is necessary, simply to produce the designs, but also to simply advance a project at this scale. It's typical.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you familiar with our agency, TJPA has a small internal staff. We rely heavily on what's known as program management for staff supplementation. So it's not just, doing cost and schedule. It's actually providing staff members that help us advance the program. Certainly a majority of our project team members come from this contract.
Member Levine?
Thank you. Just have a quick question. In the summary, there's an indication that the portal project will extend to the transit center with accommodations for future high-speed rail, and I'm just curious what proportion or what donation that high-speed rail is making to the project.
Presently, high-speed rail is carrying an estimate in their business plan of $553 million.
I'll just add that the number one priority for the project over the next couple of years is closing the funding plan and securing the non-federal money that is necessary for the Federal Transit Administration to commit its $3.4 billion. They will not do that until we've assembled all the other nickels and dimes. And while Alfonso is right, there is a longstanding pledge of $550 million from the High-Speed Rail Authority. We need to make that real, and that will be the locus of advocacy among other priorities with the state and other funders.
I guess that was going to be my follow-up. These funds are rather shaky at this point, so $550 million, I assume, are federal funds.
They're actually more likely to be state funds of some kind. And so we did have a major milestone last calendar year with the state's reauthorization of Cap and Trade, now called Cap and Invest, which funds both the TIRCP capital program and the High-Speed Rail Authority. And so there is an active effort picking up a lot of steam now to work across the local partners, ourselves, TJPA and others, particularly MTC, in engagement and advocacy with the state, both the delegation and at a staff level, to secure both TIRCP funds and a high-speed rail commitment to the project. So it's not for sure, but it is, we have a funding strategy that reflects both those components within it.
Thank you.
Member Ortega?
Hi. Thank you, Member Levine, for asking the question I was thinking and didn't want to ask because I didn't want to jinx it. I actually have a different question. It's the right-of-way. Could you just give a really, really high level of what that is again? I think I know, but I actually would just like to have an official answer in my head.
Sure, I'll start, and then Alfonso can jump in. Right-of-way just refers to any property or property rights that is necessary for the project. So a property could be acquiring land that's necessary for example, a vent structure to ventilate the tunnel at the surface. It also, and this is a process going on right now, includes formalizing the city's grant of a right for the tunnel to occupy the land beneath a public right-of-way, beneath 2nd Street and Townsend Street, for example. There's actually a process for the city to grant TJPA the right for the spatial volume of the tunnel underneath a public right-of-way. And so collectively, that whole program we call the right-of-way program. We are fortunate on this project that compared to many other urban rail programs at this scale, that the right-of-way program, while critical to preparing for construction, is relatively manageable in terms of its overall scale. And TJPA is moving forward this year with the first phase of that program. And if you'd wish, Alfonso could certainly add some color to that.
I think Jesse covered it really well. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. I'd just be curious to hear progress updates on that as we go forward, but that's all for now.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a quick, I think, related question on the right-of-way acquisition. First of all, just very basically, is it possible for any of the right-of-way acquisition to not come through, or is that pretty guaranteed? And then relatedly, the memo mentioned acquisitions that result in displacements and complicated relocations. I was just wondering if you all already know the scope of where those would be. Yeah.
I'll start and then ask Alfonso to jump in. One of the reasons that right-of-way is always so important for a program like this, and why the lead agency needs to start early is that it takes time. And it is a very structured process legally and regulatorily, both at a local level as well as very strict requirements and planning that the Federal Transit Administration requires sponsors to prepare and undertake as they move that forward, including provisions to address any displacement, for example. Now, as part of that process from a legal perspective and from a process perspective, the lead agency, in this case TJPA, is always going to start from the perspective of seeking a mutual or consensual arrangement with a seller. That said, for a public project, there is the ability eventually, should that fail, and if you go into the legal process associated with such a case, to use eminent domain authority to acquire necessary property or property rights. So that is a last resort in the process, but the schedule permits and contemplates that should it be necessary. Alfonso, do you want to add anything to that?
Gosh, I think you're 3 for 3, Jesse, on the answers. So unless there's any follow-up questions, I'll stand behind your response.
Does that address your question, Chair?
That does address my question. And then the issue of, do you all already know where those locations are?
Do you want to speak to that, Alfonso? And I know there's, I believe, a map that we could refer CAC members to.
Yeah, as Jesse said, we're progressing it this year. We're doing it in what we call 5 tranches. The first tranche is underway, 5 properties. They are the full take parcels. In other words, they represent those properties that we require for the ventilation shafts that are outside the street right away. For instance, one is the northeast corner of 5th and Townsend Street. We've engaged those property owners. Certainly the entire list is aware, but tranche 1 represents those which we are currently obtaining appraisals as a process where we can, with FTA's concurrence, if they're within appropriate guidelines, we present them. And so that's tranche 1, 5 parcels off-site, and they're the full take parcels. The other location is up at the northeast corner of Howard and 2nd Street. If you know that part of the area, it's just southwest of the Salesforce Transit Center. The reason why we're taking those buildings at the northeast corner is that represents where we have to remove the buildings. They're part of a demolition contract and represents the area that we have to build the tunnel as a top down. It's very shallow. It's rather wide because at that part of the alignment, it's a width to accommodate 6 tracks, because we do have room in the Salesforce Transit Center for 3 center platforms, 6 tracks. Again, those property owners are well aware, and our real estate manager is working with them. Tranches 2, 3, 4, and 5 are largely the subterranean easements that we need, because although this right-of-way the project is being built underneath Townsend and 2nd Street, we do have corners. We have to cut the northwest corner of Townsend and 2nd Street, and then we clip a corner on the southeast corner of Howard and 2nd Street. Those are the subsurface easements that we require. They're not full takes. They're just subsurface easements. They do have value, though, so we have to conduct appraisals and approach the owners. And then, as Jesse pointed out, one of the tranches has to do with completing the subsurface easement rights that we are seeking from the city and county of San Francisco to actually build the tunnel. So they're just divvied up in 5 tranches, and the timelines are associated to when we need the property. But we've already begun with tranche 1.
All right, thank you both. That's really helpful. If there are no other questions or comments from members, is there any public comment in the room on this item? Not seeing any. Operator, is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great. Then can I get a motion and a second to approve this item? Moved by Member Ortega. Seconded by Member Ford. Madam Clerk, can we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 9, TJPA allocation and grant amendment, Member Bars?
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Vice Chair Daniels?
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford?
Ford, aye.
Ford, aye. Member Imadadeen?
Ahmadudin, aye.
Imadadeen, aye. Member Kim?
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine?
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita?
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales?
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega?
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel?
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 10 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move on to item 10, adopt a motion of support to amend the Octavia Improvement Study recommendations to add the Hayes Valley Public Life Study as an eligible use of revenues. Rachel Hyatt, Deputy Director for Planning, and Jeremy Shaw, Principal Planner with the Planning Department, will present this item.
Good evening, CAC members. Rachel Hyatt, Deputy Director for Planning. And I have a little bit of background here because this one has a bit of a complex background. Okay. The story dates back to 1999 when San Francisco voters approved what was Prop I. And this designated, this was related to the Market and Octavia land use plan, and Prop I designated the use of the proceeds from sales of former Central Freeway parcels. So to build Octavia Boulevard, and then also to use any remaining revenues for transportation improvements to corridors that are ancillary to Octavia Boulevard. So following, part of the governance structure for this Prop I is that it required the Transportation Authority to be the one to prioritize these ancillary projects, so the uses of the revenue. And that was a requirement that we do so in consultation with the Central Freeway CAC, which was a body that existed at that time and has since been dissolved. Following the Central Freeway CAC, we worked with the Market and Octavia CAC, which had its last meeting actually in December. That was the body that guided the use of the revenues following the dissolution of Central Freeway CAC. So then that brings us to the Octavia Improvement Study, which the Transportation Authority Board adopted in 2023, and it provided a new set of recommendations for the balance of revenues that were in the fund at the time, and those are shown on this table here. They're a set of near-term recommendations to be sponsored by SFMTA as the lead agency, mainly related to traffic calming in the Market and Octavia plan area. This action would amend the eligible uses of the parcel special fund revenues to allow for a proposed Hayes Valley Public Life Study. And that's what Jeremy is going to describe, the scope, schedule, and budget for that proposed study. The action would be to make eligible the use of the revenues for that study purpose, and also ask that the planning department require that the planning department bring back the findings from this study at a midpoint to this body, which would be the new CAC, to provide input on this and to bring the final findings back to this body and to then our board. And the table here shows you what the balance of funds would be, sort of how the balance of funds would be programmed if the Hayes Valley Public Life Study were to be approved through this action, that were to be made eligible through this action. So with that, let me acknowledge Raynil Cooper, who's the aide for District 5, that we've been working on this with. This action is at the request of District 5 Commissioner Mahmood. And then Raynil, if you would like to make any remarks, you're welcome to. And then Jeremy will be the main presenter. Bring those up.
Hello, all. Yes, my name is Raynell Cooper, legislative aide for District 5 Commissioner / Supervisor Bilal Mahmoud. I think as we switch to the slides, I have a quick little intro and overview, and then Jeremy from Planning will give most of the presentation. A lot of slides going on. So just to give a little bit of background, this public life study is going to be centered on Hayes Valley, on the 400 and 500 blocks of Hayes Street. This is an area that is at the heart of Hayes Valley. It's an important corridor in the heart of the district, commercial corridor. It also has a street closure during Friday evenings and on Saturdays. This street closure is part of the Shared Spaces program through SFMTA, and we want to use this as an opportunity to take a look at the impact that the street closure has on the community, with a focus here on transportation, especially given the source of the funds, but also using this as an opportunity to hear a little bit from the public and also take a really close look and answer some of the outstanding questions about the impact of the street closure, specifically around transit and traffic, which you'll hear about shortly. Little issue. Let me see if I have any. I think that's the top line there. Oh, I think we've got it. Great. We can go to I thought you were saying you had it. Okay. Yes. Apologies. That's okay. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so as mentioned, our request goal of analysis. Thank you to Rachel for giving all the overview of the Octavia Improvement Study. There's more information on that from MTA as well in the file for this item, and talking about the freeway removal fund. And this will inform, among other things, the future permit renewals for the street closure there on Hayes Street. Next slide.
Great. Good evening, Chair Siegel, members of the CAC. Jeremy Shaw, I'm a principal planner at the Planning Department. Can you hear me okay? So I think the takeaway here is the study is meant to understand the transportation impacts of the shared space street closure on Hayes. The scope is straightforward. These are the 6 tasks. We would, in the startup task, we just refine the scope and work out the particulars of the study with the consultant that is yet to be on board, but we would use an existing contract to get that started. And administering the public life pedestrian bike survey would be a big chunk of the contract. And then in scope item 4 there, we would also compile existing data that the MTA has, the police department, about that more in a sec, and possibly qualitative data from the shared space project itself. Analysis, and then the final task is an optional task. And given that other projects, as Rachel mentioned, are funded by the Market and Octavia Fund, and the design and sort of implementation of those is an ongoing process with MTA, we wanted to make sure that if there were any findings from this study to be addressed or incorporated in those projects, that we had the conceptual design examined or analyzed before then. So we don't know if we'll use task item 6 there, but we wanted to make sure we had the budget if we needed to sketch out different alternatives. Next slide, please. So some of that data that the study will focus on, again, is the transportation impacts of the street closures, including transit delay or loading and downstream vehicular impacts. Also, public life, how pedestrians and bikes are using and accessing and remaining in the space. And again, depending on the data available, we would talk to businesses, emergency services, and understand the implications for city staff costs. The final deliverable will be a technical memo or slide deck with recommendations. Might be more visible in your packets, but this is a preliminary budget, including consultant and city costs, city staff costs. The final budget is subject to discussion and scoping with the consultant once we have approval for, we have approval for this fund. Next slide, please. Again, this is a little bit hard to see, but the short of the timeline is that it's an 8-month project without the optional task. So we anticipate, if the contract begins soon, there's a world where we start in March and end by the end of October, in November, and depending on what the study says at that point, we may take 2 to 3 months for the optional task after that. But we do believe it can be done by the end of the year. Slide, please. So next steps, I think it's also in your packet. We would, here today, we were at the Market Octavia CAC in December. The next step, as you well know, would be going to the authority board. I believe that's the last. Yeah, we're here to answer any questions.
Great, thanks for the presentation. Member Bars.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I am really interested in this study. I think this is a really fascinating. I'll be very interested to see the concepts that come out of it. I just wanted to ask, maybe this isn't in the memo, but not in the slides, but where you talk about analysis of public life on slide 5, are you trying to understand the economic impact of the space on businesses in the area? I'm just curious if that's maybe detailed elsewhere.
It's not detailed in your materials, but when we speak of a public life study, the planning department has a kind of methodology that we've tested and refined over the years for just understanding how people are using public space. So it doesn't get into the business particulars, but more like where the pedestrians are coming from, how long are they staying in that space, same for cyclists, and depending on how we scope it, how they interact with automobiles. So just like a snapshot of what people are doing in that space. Additionally, we anticipate qualitative, most likely data from businesses in the vicinity, because we're not gathering business data at this scale is challenging, but we do want to make sure that the impacts are addressed in some fashion.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm maybe just very sensitive to the needs of our small business community, and I'm sure everybody here is. Small businesses are one of the things that make San Francisco wonderful, right? And I know that a lot of the business community is very supportive of this space and the current weekend closure. So I doubt it's very much of a worry about support as much as it's just building trust, building, rapport with the business community, demonstrating how street changes can make their business lives easier. I just think that that's a very important thing to keep in mind over the course of the study. So thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation. I'm supportive of the study. I have a couple of, I think, clarifying questions maybe for SFMTA about the remaining recommendations that had come out of the 2023 study. So the memo that we have has that table that we saw of all the projects with the amendment of the addition of the new study and the cost breakdown. But then one of the attachments in the packet says that the bulb outs have been deprioritized and a different project has been prioritized. So I was just wondering, is that what's like the current status of are the recommendations going to change further based on that, or are they not? Are they not changing? Oh, sorry, I was just a little confused by that.
Hi, Casey Hildreth, SFMTA planner. Good question. I think after the study was completed, we were able to actually do a bit more site analysis and engineering, particularly with the bulb outs, proposed conceptually for sort of up the hill at Webster and Buchanan. Came to the conclusion that if we were to touch one corner and do one bulb out, we basically own the entire intersection and had to rebuild signals. There's a lot of risk and a lot of cost, more than we anticipated during the study when it was completed. So it's not to say that we wouldn't come back and maybe do one of those intersections, but didn't think it was appropriate to, it was not going to be able to proceed the way that we originally thought. So we are not recommending that as a top priority right now versus some of the other clear priorities that came out of the 2003 study. And I will add that since that time, there has been at least one project, a paving project that will be coming through on Oak, adding curb ramps where there wasn't some before, not bulb outs. So there will be investment on several of those corners that was not anticipated during the life of the study.
I see. Okay, so it is still a potential planned use of the funds, but it's just not prioritized immediately, or?
Correct, and
yeah.
I think to the extent that we just want to see how this study plays out, advance some of the other priorities to understand cost implications there, and the recommendations don't go after all of the money that's available. We want to keep some available for what emerges in the coming years, and that may or may not come back as a priority.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then, relatedly, I'm actually most excited about the traffic calming on Octavia Street of the remaining recommendations. I was wondering, like, do any of these have a timeline for beginning, or it seems like none of them are in progress yet. Is that correct?
Correct. We are waiting for these funds, the special funds, to be secured before starting, those other efforts. And yes, separate from the public life study, the SFMTA is seeking, funding to advance traffic calming and ADA improvements for the Octavia Boulevard corridor. It's picking up some planning that we had done about a decade ago, but sort of starting with some of the more basic improvements that would have to happen with any streetscape project, namely upgrading ADA. Bring some traffic calming along with that is the idea. That'll just set the table for what other traffic calming improvements would come out of potentially this study or additional outreach that the MTA will lead. So it's meant to be sort of a phase one towards a bigger vision of traffic calming along the boulevard.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful context. Member Milford Rosales.
So just a quick question, kind of inspired by Chairperson Siegel's question. This quality of life study, will it be looking at further potential infrastructure changes to support the street closure? I'm aware that right now that's running heavily on volunteer effort, and that's been the case for a while, and there's not a significant number of volunteers to keep it going, but it seems like it's something that's well supported by the community. And I've heard talk from some of the volunteers about wondering if there'd be chances to get proposals together to get anything run by MTA to support the closure.
Just to clarify, when you say infrastructure,
something, so something as magical as retractable bollards, or as simple as like not having to keep a rotating list of neighbors who are in charge of taking the cones out and back at risk of legal liability to themselves if they forget to do it on time?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think ultimately that the management of the space is, you know, currently this falls into the shared spaces program, and the rules of the shared spaces program, you know, doesn't come with any funding, doesn't come with any sort of kind of that level of support, so in order for something like that, especially when you start talking about the sort of the staffing that would require, you know, people, I think that would require some creation of a program and allocation of funding, and that would likely come from SFMTA, and that would be a conversation down the road. I think the idea behind the study is to really get the facts that will help support any kind of decisions that are made by decision makers, whether that be on the board side or at the various departments that are involved or engaged, as well as in the neighborhood as well, to give more clarity. But I don't think anything directly from the study would lead directly into something like you're describing.
So it would not be this study would not be making any kind of recommendations on supporting the street closure or even making infrastructure changes that don't require staffing that would make it easier.
We can't say what the study, I guess, is going to recommend, but I think the way it's scoped is first to understand the impacts, and if we do choose to exercise optional task 6, is to consider ways forward that could be capital improvements or it could be focused on public life and events and activation. So I don't have an answer for you, but that is part of the study.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Member Ortega?
Hi, yes, we're playing catch. It's inspired by Milford Rosales. Member Milford Rosales' question here. One of the things that I can't help but notice is this is right near the exit for 101. And obviously I have a hunch that from 2023 to today, that traffic is going to be very different than what came out of the study. So I know you already have in this that you want to include traffic study. I think that something that I would appreciate out of the study, so I'm making an ask here, is I would like to understand both commuter, like peak commuter hour, and non-commuter hour times. I'd like that separated and I'd like that called out. I'd also like to note on if, so I don't remember, but in one of our other meetings, and I'm trying to remember the agency, I think it was Caltrans, the highway, it was requiring the design to have 2 right turns for highway capacity. And I'm curious if there is going to be something like that that could affect like the results, and or if that can be included, if if 101's exit is going to cause something where suddenly we're looking at like a highway capacity issue situation. Does that make sense?
So you're referring to the Central Freeway off-ramp at Market Street?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's going to be a tie or a pushback or what that connection is going to be, because I want to be very clear. I think it's important that the community get a neighborhood that they like. It's not against that. It's just that we've had other meetings where because of how the highway infrastructure has to be done, it's caused pushback on recommended street adjustments. Okay. And so I'm curious if that could potentially be something that comes up. And if so, if we can make sure we call that out in the study and like have that preemptively talked about, because I feel like one of the things is we have all these wonderful ideas and then it's like, oh, actually we found out like the highway was there and we couldn't do it. It's like the highway is always there. And you're looking at a really, really major exit. So does that make sense?
Yes. I made it clear assessing the transportation impacts and traffic impacts is part of the study, first phase of the study. I think fortunately because of some of the work that we've done at the MTA, and just I think because of the demand patterns. There's really not a lot of relationship of the Central Freeway traffic. A lot of that is headed to Oakensell, and we've sort of kind of cut off the vehicular connection to Hayes Street. So there's not a lot of interaction with that. I think, folks coming from Hayes, from downtown, that's maybe more of where the traffic impacts. They head Goff, where do they go from there? I would say that, there's no rules that we're going to be uncovering that will hamper us. I think it's more about good policy, good design, good community engagement. But we shouldn't have that issue arise in the study. I'd be shocked if anything like that came up.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just, looking at a map, I was surprised by some of the stuff before, so I wanted to ask.
Member Imaduddin.
Just a quick question on slide 6. What does the optional part mean on task 6?
So task 6 is entirely optional, and it's focused on developing concepts or alternatives that would satisfy any of the recommendations from task 5. So, the first 5 tasks you could consider analysis, and then if we opt for task 6, it's looking at different alternatives or potential design refinements to things that are already in the Market Octavia Fund. So it's really about the forward-looking part of it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments from members, is there any public comment in the room on this item? Not seeing any. Is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great. May I have a motion and a second to approve item 10? By Member Imaduddin, seconded by Member Milford Rosales. Madam Clerk, can we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 10, amend the Octavia Improvement Study, Member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Vice Chair Daniels.
Daniels, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford.
Ford, aye.
Ford, aye. Member Imaduddin.
Imaduddin, aye.
Imaduddin, aye. Member Kim.
Kim abstain.
Kim abstain. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita.
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales.
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 9 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. Thanks again to our presenters. We'll move on to item 11, adopt a motion of support to approve the 2026 state and federal advocacy program. I'd like to welcome Senior Public Policy Manager Amber Crabb to present this item.
Sorry, thank you about that. So I'm Amber Crabb, the Senior Public Policy Manager, and you see this item every year. It's the state and federal advocacy program that kind of guides our work throughout the year in those areas, as well as informs the positions we take every month to our board that you also see. It's comprised of broad goals and strategies that don't vary too much year to year. It's really the details that we focus on that change based on opportunities, and the focus is usually around seeking and securing funding, as well as kind of other policy priorities, things like the coming out of the Climate Action Plan or the work on autonomous vehicles that we've been doing the past few years. And we do develop it in coordination with partner organizations across the region and the state, like SFMTA and MTC. So at the state level, we have kind of 5 top priorities in no specific order that will likely be the bulk of our work this year. The first is supporting SFMTA, BART, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and others on securing up to $750 million in a state transit loan to address near-term financial shortfalls. And this would be one-time funding that would help bridge the gap between June of 26 and when any revenue from a potential measure would start to be dispersed. And so we're hearing progress is being made in the conversations with the Department of Finance, but they haven't reached an agreement yet. So we'll be continuing to support them on that. We'll also be advocating for transit funding, both in the state budget and within the CAP and Invest program that got reauthorized last year. We'll be seeking funding for the 2 major transit investment programs, the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program and the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program that have statutory limits within the CAP and Invest expenditure plan. So we're going to do what we can to maximize the amount of funding that can go to those programs, as well as advocating for the state budget to include commitments to transit from prior budget years, committed previously but subject to annual appropriations. So you got to go back every year and ask for it. And then finally, within the CAP and Invest, There we go. My PowerPoint. Within the CAP and Invest expenditure plan, there was a transit pass program funded at $125 million, and if that does move forward, we'll be looking at opportunities for San Francisco and the region to participate in that. Then with respect to the portal, you heard a lot about it earlier in item 9, but as Mr. Kaler stated, this is really a year for us to push on getting that $1 billion total state commitment to the project. So we'll be seeking out from several different sources, including the TIRCP program and high-speed rail, as well as potentially directed spending. But we're really focused on a near-term need that the TJPA has for around $110 million, and that's needed needs to be committed within this fiscal year to continue near-term work before their federal funding is authorized. And then TJPA is also, I believe they may have an author on a bill that would extend the terms of local tax increment financing they have for formerly state-owned parcels that would have the opportunity for them to raise additional local funding if it's authorized. With respect to autonomous vehicles, bills keep popping up every day. We'll be continuing to work on regulation and so that they're deployed in a way that's safe and resilient and has public accountability. So we'll be focused on other policy areas such as data transparency, compliance with driver statutes, emergency response, and then incremental permit procedures at the state level. And then finally, supporting e-mobility and climate resiliency. This is where we'll be supporting funding and policies coming out of the Climate Action Plan, and then also supporting, in general, electrification of both public and private fleets, and that includes things like incentives for e-bikes. And then at the federal level, we'll be holding on, basically continuing to advocate just to maintain spending at current levels. Thank you, Martin, to potentially look for directed funding like earmarks, and then engaging in the update to the current federal transportation bill, which expires in September of 2026. So we'll likely see continuing resolutions, but we'll still be engaging to maximize funding as much as we can there. And then there's real opportunities on autonomous vehicles at the federal level. There's momentum gathering behind a national AV policy development, with hearings already have started on it. And we'll be working to make sure that we're sharing our knowledge, that we're increasing safety. But then really importantly at the federal government is avoiding any framework that preempts the roles that state and local governments currently have to oversee and regulate these technologies. So with that, I'll advance the slide to the last one correctly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you so much. Member Levine.
Yes, thanks for their presentation. I'm particularly pleased to see autonomous vehicles as a high priority, both federally and at the state level. One thing I guess I would like to see more directly, and that is a direct statement supporting more local enforcement and control over these autonomous vehicles. I mean, you're talking about policy, you're talking about more general concerns. I'm talking about being able to issue a parking ticket by our local parking control officers. There's nothing that I see in any of these provisions that talk to that issue.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point, and something that we worked closely with then Assemblymember Ting, who passed Assembly Bill 1777 2 years ago, and that up until the finish line, it did include giving the ability of local jurisdictions to issue citations. Currently, they require a signature of a driver, and since they don't have them for autonomous vehicles, it's a very murky area, and they've just said we're not able to issue citations. And so we tried in that legislation to fix that. It gave forget the terminology of art they used, but essentially they told the DMV to come up with a solution, and it hasn't happened yet. So it is front of mind, and it is still something that we definitely are including in our thoughts about the policy framework moving forward. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from members? If not, is there any public comment in the room on this item?
Edward Mason. What about micromobility? There seems to be an explosion of micromobility, and I get caught in the crosshairs in that. I mean, I've had people 2 days ago on a bicycle that had such thick tires on it, big tires, almost like a motorcycle, electric, came up right on my right side and just passed me on the sidewalk. So, you know, every time I turn around, there's another micromobility problem, whether it's a scooter, whether it's a bicycle, a big electric bicycle. You know, I'm just getting concerned that the explosion of it, and absolutely there seems to be no regulation or enforcement. And there's sidewalk riding. You know, I thought sidewalks were for pedestrians, but they're on the sidewalk. So I'm just so frustrated with the collisions that I've almost had with people on these things that come up out of nowhere. So that's, I guess, my 2 cents regarding safety for the population and also the reckless behavior that people have. I have seen young people on bicycles, electric bicycles, on one wheel, on the rear wheel, and they're going down the street on one wheel because the other one is raised, and they're having a grand time. And if they get killed, fine, that's their problem. But it's a problem. And go down to the Ferry Plaza along Market Street down there. All you have to do is see all of the violations that go on down there. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great, thank you so much. Actually, I have one question for you real quick, Ms. Crabb, inspired by Mr. Mason's question. Are we tracking any legislative policy related to like e-bike safety generally?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think a lot of communities are grappling with this with a variety of new every day. There's a new option on the street, literally. There are a number of bills out there to have better definitions to kind of be able to separate out, you know, what's really an e-bike, what's a scooter, what's like an electronic assist bike versus a fully electronic one. So I think there are some bills that are grappling with those definitions, which is a step toward then, okay, now that we know what it is, how do we regulate it? Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. May I have a motion and a second to approve item 11, moved by member Levine, seconded by member Milford Rosales. Madam Clerk, can we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 11, approve 2026 state and federal advocacy program, member Bars?
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Vice Chair Daniels?
Daniel, aye.
Daniels, aye. Member Ford?
Ford, aye.
Ford, aye. Member Imadadeen?
Imadadeen, aye.
Imadadeen, aye. Member Kim?
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine?
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Margarita?
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales?
Milford Rosales, aye.
Milford Rosales, aye. Member Ortega?
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Chair Siegel?
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 10 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. We'll move on to item 12, adopt a motion of support to adopt the District 4 Community Shuttle Study final report. This presentation will be delivered by Principal Transportation Planner John Paul Velez, who presented the draft study findings to the CAC at our November 19th meeting.
Good evening. Yes, thank you, Chair, for that introduction. I presented the whole kind of at our last CAC meeting in November. Oh, my best friend. There we go. Yes, so again, last CAC, November CAC, I presented the full extent of the report. The main difference that we're bringing now is that we're moving from an info item to an action item. And so I'm just curious if you know, I'm prepared to give the presentation again, if that is the committee's preference, or we can jump to Q&As or you see fit.
Do any members specifically want to see the presentation again, or can we go to, yeah, Member Ortega, yeah.
No, that was like a question. What are we voting on? Like, is it just to accept that the study is study, or is it that we need to do more action past that?
A little limitation here, sorry. Actually, John Paul, if you could just very quickly remind them of what the recommendations are. The action is to accept this study, and there's sort of one recommendation, a couple of next steps.
Yeah, so this project was tasked with developing a design for microtransit service in District 4. And that included not only the kind of technical and operating parameters, but also a budget and an implementation study for that report, or for the service that was designed. So again, that's the goal of the report. We are recommending that we move forward to funding for this pilot. And again, the strategy that we presented last is aim to just do a pilot and assess whether the project, the service is successful before moving forward to making that service a permanent service. Presented a recommendation where a lot of the projected funding for the service would come from a combination of earmarks, corporate sponsorships, as well as local funding. And so, yeah, the recommendation would be to continue to pursue that funding moving forward with the adoption of the report.
Makes sense. Yeah, Member Kim?
Thank you, Chair. And I have a couple of questions. So the pilot, here's a service area and hour of operation, weekday 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., weekend 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Also, is this pilot program is the same schedule? And then could tell me at the same time this in the schedule, how many people going around? Do you have any for the number of a vehicle for the pilot, and then later on expand to, do you have any schedule like regular operation later?
During the pilot, we would still have basically the way that this works. Sorry, here we go, my best friend. The supply of vehicles fluctuates with demand, and so there's at a peak demand period, like during the peak hours of commute, you would have a maximum of 5 vehicles providing service. That is the current design. And then that kind of ramps down to a smaller number of vehicles during the valleys in terms of demand. So this is precisely the current service design. I think through the RFP and the contracting, we could grant additional flexibility, but that is kind of what we've scoped so far. And then we would project that if the service were to become permanent, probably a very similar operating model with, again, fluctuation in the demand of, in the supply of vehicles that is used is carried forward. That's one of the advantages of this type of service.
Thank you. And is there any specific, the users, like how do you define the users, which means someone who has address in the District 4 or?
Anyone that is inside of District 4, inside the service area, that is mapped to District 4 plus the Stonestown Galleria.
Okay, so someone resident, District 4 residents?
Not just residents, anyone that is inside.
Anyone
as long as
inside.
Because the service is pinned, works either through a smartphone request, or you can call from the phone and ask for the service. But you have to give a local origin and a local destination within that service area.
Yeah, so someone who has Clipper card within those area and then moving within District 4 area, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they doesn't need to be a resident of District 4. It's open to the public at large.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Member Ford?
Hi. So I read through some of this in the packet, and one of the things I felt like was really missing from the study was like best alternative using Muni. Like if we put $1 million into D4 North-South Muni service, that's about 62 extra buses. That's a lot of service to Stonestown. Why didn't you include that in the study? Is that back of the envelope math correct? And why would this be a priority if it's not a priority for Muni to fund North-South buses in D4 today under the Muni budget?
Thank you for the question. We did not study the alternatives because the scope of this service of this project was to design the service and an implementation strategy for the service. So I think you speak about North-South movement and access to Stonestown. At the end of the day, the service was created following having identified a need in the D4 mobility study from a few years prior, where the problem identified was local mobility within District 4. So in this case, Stonestown is not even a part of District 4. And was to access commercial corridors and other key destinations within the district. And so we assessed that there is indeed a need to get to those locations in a competitive way by way of transit, and that's part of what we discussed last time around. And so this service is a response mainly to that. This service design is a response to that need. The addition specifically of Stonestown and Galleria Mall is following best practices to, if there's an opportunity to add, adjacent hubs that kind of bring about more trips to the service, that then there's a value to that. So that is in part why, again, you see that addition. But at the end, the core idea is that kind of local mobility challenge that is identified in the District 4 mobility study, and that we could confirm with our analyses.
One last question, mostly to convince my colleagues around the board. Is this, in your professional opinion, the most important use of staff and muni money in 2026? In terms of the way in which we can use our local transportation dollars. This is a $25 per trip, more than the paratransit cost. Shuttle for a high resource neighborhood that happens to be mine. And I get it that the Sunset's got its like transportation hot topics of people saying they got a lot of trouble getting north and south. But it's a very dense neighborhood. It's a grid. It is well suited for fixed service line muni transportation should we want to move a bus and put it there. And the reason those buses don't exist is not because we don't understand how to run a bus from A to B. It's because we haven't prioritized the money to run that bus. And like a sideways grant that requires us to talk about this for the next 22 years with incremental funding requests is like not going to change the transportation situation in D4. And like, I don't think that we should recommend following up on this study at all. It's just a waste of staff time and our time.
I'm not in a position to speak about whether to prioritize or not the service compared to other alternatives. What I can share is that like you're emphasizing this $25 per trip figure. So to provide some context, more than Uber, correct? But Uber does not provide equitable service. Uber doesn't offer kind of wage union kind of wages to. Correct. So I'm just giving you the reasons to the issues that you're bringing up. So, but speaking to paratransit, I guess the issue here is what is a right comparator to this kind of type of service, right? So we see that fixed route transit performs at a much more efficient level in terms of, again, cost per passenger trip, which is what you're focusing on. But we also see on the paratransit side of things, much more higher levels of passengers per trip. So in the National Transportation Database, the latest numbers from SFCTA say $90 per passenger trip. So I don't think the service is either one of those, right? This is a very specific and a niche service aiming to address a very specific need in terms of coverage. And so that this is precisely why I think that kind of price points kind of signifies that you have to come up with alternative solutions that are not as efficient as your high capacity fixed route transit service. So this is why you see this, and I would say that this type of figure is very common to any type of microtransit implementation that you see in the country, with the specific color that, of course, San Francisco cost of living is higher, and so wages are high, and again, we have the value of offering kind of a living wage and benefits to folks that work for the city.
Yeah, Member Kim.
Thank you for. I want to leave comment. I'm really support this project and want to see the outcome. You know, a couple of times I recommend MTA needed to lead out analysis. So after pandemic, we have shifted demand, but somehow MTA so far didn't do lead out. So maybe this pilot project, it turns out really successful, but like Member Board mentioned, you know, that's the time, you know, we can increase fixed route in the District 4. But so far, you know, District 4, you know, their analysis, you know, is actually comparing to east side, west side, including District 1, there's a lack of public transit service. So far, we keep asking more bus line, but even District 1, we have a couple of bus line lost. So there's no way we can test it. But this is a kind of example for those analysis, especially Stonestown. I have 3 kids, and my kids college he coming back to airport, and then I want him to pick up from the Stonestown, but it's very hard from the airport to Dali bus station. He carried 2 big carries, and even there, I have 2 big bags, so I cannot. I have to go pick up SFO, but I really want to see if we can create some connection from Stonestown to Park Station or Stonestown to SFO, and then I don't need to drive. I can go to, Stonestown, pick him up. If it's airplane delay, I can go Starbucks. There's a lot of food store. I don't need to worry about it. But if you go SFO, sometimes so many cars. So many cars. Even sometimes we have to wait from the 1 hour there. So not only think, this is the cost effective or not, in the future, maybe this can be, one of the solution, we can provide connection. So, and we don't know until we try. So this is the very beneficial project for the future analysis. So I'm strongly supported. Thank you.
I am, I think, a little concerned about recommending a pilot without funding identified for ongoing operations. I mean, I know that the Bayview shuttle has been really popular, and despite that is still struggling to find ongoing sources of funding. So that's a concern for me. I know you noted in the memo that this project would be less competitive for grants and would need to seek other sources of local funding. So I would really, love, I know it's not technically the initial scope of the study, but I would love to see a recommendation that we, pilot something like run the 18 to Daly City BART, or run the 18 every 10 minutes instead of every 20 minutes, or, could we pilot an additional north-south line somewhere between 19th Avenue and Sunset Boulevard that goes to Stonestown and the airport? That would be a really cool thing to pilot. So anyway, I would love to, I think that is consistent with both Member Ford's and Member Kim's feedback, and would sort of accomplish or address both concerns and accomplish both goals. So I don't know if it's possible to make a recommendation about something like that, but that would be my feedback about this. I don't think I have a question for you, because I think you explained pretty clearly in the report that this is not really competitive for funding besides local funding. So I would love to recommend that local funding go to a pilot for additional muni service.
I would clarify that the local funding is not the only source that we think should bring about the pilot. What we describe in the report and in the slides is a combination where we see either new grant sources that may come about, or earmarks. We also talk about corporate sponsorship, and all of those I would say, would need to come in first and be identified first before we start to kind of bring about local resources. So it would be that the local resources, if anything, I would see them as a match to be able to access the other resources. But yeah, typically kind of what you see is that it's very hard to make that transition from a pilot to a more permanent service. But I think that part of the idea is to, again, explore and see whether there's traction for the service. And the other thing that I'll just highlight again is that and we spoke about this, I believe, in November, is that there's the ongoing West Side Network study is exploring kind of like a range of mobility options in the district or the west side at large. And so that's a great opportunity to actually compare this idea with other kind of ideas for improving mobility in the west side. And so we're tracking that, and the thing is that this service this concept was not in the pipeline before. And so now we're trying to bring it to that process and see how it stacks up and the type of feedback that we get.
Great, thank you. Member Bars?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I share some of Member Ford's concerns. I, representing District 7, have a lot of, would frankly benefit from District 4 trips to District 7 locations, but I am, I think there's some research that demonstrates that these kinds of micromobility shuttles only have so much utility, and that yes, where in some places people like them, that's often because a very specific community kind of latches on and makes it their own and uses it, and then they don't actually create routes that are on the main transit network, which frankly in a lot of cases would be more beneficial to everyone. That said, this is just a little fun anecdote. I was an intern at this agency in 2015, and one of the projects I worked on was the West Side Shuttle request, or micro shuttle request from then Commissioner Katie Tang. So this idea has been floating around for a really long time. I suspect that I suspect that the funding for supporting this kind of microtransit is just not going to be there in a sustainable way. And the right thing is to try the pilot because of the demand. But frankly, I would hope make recommendations for new Muni routes or altered Muni routes based off of the locations that people demand rides. I don't know if the study is complete and that recommendation isn't there, but that's the kind of thing I would really want to see from the pilot and would be interested in checking back in on in any midterm report. Is that kind of thing possible?
What's in the report that speaks to the various issues you brought up is from our study of different kind of services throughout the country and what best practices have emerged and what we learned from that. And so I would highlight two. One is that these services, first and foremost, are thought as coverage solutions. So once you see that fixed route transit for one way or another is not really delivering the type of mobility that folks need in a specific area, this is when these services try to come about to address that. And so that maybe speaks to the utility question that you were asking. And in some cases, these services are used as predecessors to build demand for an eventual fixed route service. And so it's a way to make sure that you can capture the population in transit and not have the need to travel by car because of this one trip that they need to do, and then they buy a car, and then that offsets all of their potential use of transit and other sustainable modes, and then just you keep using that car. And so this is how these type of services try to come about and kind of provide some of that solution, and then build kind of ridership for a fixed route transit, or as a specific area densifies. In the case of D4, we probably have a little bit of the inverse, where people have already bought that car, and we have such a high mode of using, again, single occupant vehicle travel within the district. So again, putting this service out first responds to the challenge that we identify for people that do not have access to a car to get around the district, but also starts to offer a solution for folks in the district to not be so car dependent. And so maybe the mode shift is not something that happens automatically, but in time, as many of these kind of solutions pile up, you actually see a more structural change in their travel behavior. But yeah, that's what kind of our research kind of suggested.
Also, the short answer is, were there to be a pilot? Yes, of course, the data could be used in Forum to make changes to Muni service or a pilot or do nothing.
Vice Chair Daniels.
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a question about our internal process. So if by chance this is not approved tonight, what happens to it?
So we could decide, we'd probably consult with the district supervisor. We could hold it and bring it back here, or we could take it direct to board, and Chair Siegel would do her usual very detailed report at board about the CAC's discussion.
Thank you.
Great. There are no other questions or comments from members. Is there any public comment in the room on this item?
Edward Mason, I only have some random thoughts regarding this. The cost difference will be like $31 versus, let me get my other glasses. Geez. I'm sorry. The cost difference based on the data that I can figure out here is that you're expecting 100,000 riders for $3 million. Well, that's $31 a trip versus $19 that it would be for a Waymo. People may be adverse to Waymo, but that's part of the deal that's going to go on. It's really trying to satisfy a culture of convenience because when you have an auto, that's pretty convenient, and then you're going to have to peel people away from that. It's counterculture to that. Transit is moving to autonomous vehicles, and there's plenty of literature that is in the press now. The future, demographically, is going to be, after the pilot program, how are you going to hire people? Because demographically, there's a depopulation going on in the United States, let alone the world, and that's started 20 years ago. And when they say we have a low unemployment rate, my response is the unemployed were not born currently. In the Bayview, they had it for a year, and they only had 55,000 trips, and I can't find on the internet from Muni how much that Bayview shuttle program costs to determine the cost per trip. So I don't know. Here we are. We got money, but should we use that money in other more productive ways than trying to go for pilot program? So good luck on what the decision is.
Thank you for your comment. Is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great. Can I have a motion and a second on item 12? Moved by Member Kim. Seconded by Member Imaduddin. Madam Clerk, can we please get a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 12, adopt District 4 Community Shuttle Final Report, Member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Vice Chair Daniels.
Daniels abstain.
Daniels abstain. Member Ford.
Ford, nay.
Ford, nay. Member Imaduddin.
Imaduddin, aye.
Imaduddin, aye. Member Kim.
Kim, aye.
Kim, aye. Member Levine.
Levine, nay.
Levine, nay. Member Margarita.
Margarita, aye.
Margarita, aye. Member Milford Rosales.
Milford Rosales, abstain.
Milford Rosales, abstain. Member Ortega.
Ortega, abstain.
Ortega, abstain. Chair Siegel.
Siegel, abstain.
Siegel, abstain. There are 4 ayes. The motion is not approved.
Great. Thanks again for the presentation and for staying with us so late. We'll move on to item 13, SFMTA Local Revenue Measure Update. This is an information item, and I'd like to welcome and thank for their patience Katie Ngadi with SFMTA's Office of the Chief of Staff and External Affairs, and Anthony Burton, Revenue Strategy Manager of the Finance Division to present this item. And also thank you all for staying with us so late.
Just echo the chair's thank you to our MTA staff who are working so hard on this for hanging out because we know it was a high interest. And just a friendly reminder, Katie and Anthony, just you can literally pull this so close so you don't have to bend over. There you go. Best friend.
Red Star. Oh, okay. Hi. Good evening. Thank you, Chair Daniels, for having us here. This is my first time presenting at the CAC, so very, very excited, and thank you for your interest in this really important topic. So I'm Katie Ngati. I'm with the SFMTA's Chief of Staff Office.
And can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. Anthony Burton, Revenue Strategy Manager from the Finance Division at the SFMTA.
So we are here to talk to you about the local measure, but before diving into that, I'm going to provide a little bit of background just on our budget, the deficit that we're forecasting, and our general strategy to address it. I am not from I am not our CFO, but I am going to do the best that I can to go over some of these issues and answer any questions you might have. But there is a limitation in my knowledge, but I'll take a crack at it. So our SFMTA budget generally has two components. We have a capital budget and an operating budget. The capital budget pays for the things that you see in the ground. It helps buy supplies and for buildings, and it helps buy vehicles. And so there are a lot of restrictions on how the money in the capital budget can be used. And so, but tonight we're specifically focusing on the operating budget. It is about $1.5 billion. A lot of folks ask, how do you spend all of that money? This slide starts to answer that question. 77% of our budget goes directly to delivering transit service, and this is why the loss of any large amounts of revenue could impact transit service, because such a large portion of our budget is used to fund Muni. In the current year, 16% of our budget is funded by federal, state, and regional relief. That's that pie, blue piece of the pie. And that relief will be fully spent by June 30th of 2026 of this year. And so if you're wondering what's driving the budget deficit that I'm sure that you have heard about, the loss of these dollars is we need to find a way to replace these dollars. And the loss of these dollars is what is driving that. So this is a pictorial representation of what our deficit looks like over time. The dotted orange box in FY 26-27 shows the loss of federal, state, and regional relief. The expenditure is the black line, and the blue bars represent revenue. The blue bar drops because of this relief money going away. The black bar has an upward slope, which is about 4%, and tells us that expenditure is going up, not because we are creating new programs, but because the cost of business increases every little bit each year. And this is driven primarily by cost of living adjustments in our contracts, wage increases that our employees get each year, and also due to inflation, just like you and me, and we see the prices in our grocery cart go up. That also impacts the transit industry, and so it costs more to provide service today than it did yesterday. So this means that expenditure goes up slightly as wages go up slightly, and as inflation goes up, which means our deficit increases. So we need to bring our costs down and our revenues closer together by becoming more efficient and by identifying new sources of revenue. And so last year, we initiated a process and set up a committee called the Muni Funding Working Group to look deeply into ways that we can cut costs or generate new revenue. Folks in this room might have been part of that and appreciate your service. There was a clear consensus from that group that there was not a desire to cut muni service to fill that gap, and they recommended instead to pursue large ballot measures and to raise revenue that way, as well as to find administrative efficiencies to close our budget deficit. So guided by the Muni Funding Working Group, we developed this three-pronged strategy, or what we call the three-legged stool. Each leg is important and necessary to support the stool. So it is the regional revenue measure, the local revenue measure, which is what we're going to be diving into tonight, and then agency efficiencies and revenue. So this slide shows the proportion of each strategy that we're depending on for each leg of the stool, starting in FY 27-28 and through 2031. The regional and local measure are the primary legs, generating about $300 million. But that's not quite enough, and we do have to make up that difference by becoming more efficient and generating new money within the agency. The far bar on the left, the red one, that represents one-time revenue that we're seeking to bridge us to the ballot measures, which we wouldn't start seeing money flow, until the following years. And so, while we can talk at length about any one of the legs of the stool, we're here tonight to talk about the local revenue measure. So the regional measure makes up about half of the deficit, and so we need a local measure to solve the other part of the equation. So we have been exploring and developed a proposal for a parcel tax. If this is kind of new to anyone here, it's basically a tax on land, and the tax is levied on property owners. Parcel taxes can be designed a lot of different ways. They can be flat, meaning one rate for one parcel, so $1 for every parcel, as an example. They can also be based on the size of a building, the use of a building, and so on, anything that is not the value of the property. And so just a little bit of background before we go into the structure. There are about 212,000 parcels in the city. A portion of those are exempt from property taxes based on state law, so whether they're government-owned or some nonprofits or religious institutions or hospitals are exempt. So that leaves us with about 206,000. And so the majority of parcels in San Francisco are residential. And again, the majority of parcels in San Francisco are single-family homes. So San Francisco has has five parcel taxes in San Francisco, and they are currently flat taxes, or one of them actually varies slightly by property tax, by property type. And I'm going to actually skip to the slide. These are the property taxes that we currently have in San Francisco, and you can see that they're all flat property taxes, except for one of them, the one at the very bottom, the facilities district. That one is slightly varied by, or it is varied by property type, which is a rate for a single family home and then a rate for a unit for a multifamily residential parcel. There are, at the end of the Muni Funding Working Group, the committee directed staff to start looking into a number of different revenue options, including the parcel tax. And so we started doing research, and we looked into other cities and what they did to just understand how other cities structure their parcel taxes. And so this is just kind of one example of a variety of how how other cities structured them. So a lot of flat parcels. There are, flat varied by the property type. There are structures that are by the building square foot. And then there are structures that are building square foot, further differentiated by property type. So there's a lot of ways to approach developing a parcel tax. And so while we've had a number of flat taxes to date, other cities have explored other structures. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to kind of walk you through the development of the structure that SFMTA is proposing.
Okay, so based on all of that research and feedback, it became clear to the city leadership that parcel tax was the way to go, and could be designed in a way that would be both affordable and fair. And so we set out to develop a parcel tax structure that would meet these key principles you see here, which are fair, which essentially means that, fairness in terms of who pays and how much they pay, a tax that would be reasonable, which essentially means that, we're trying not to break the bank for anybody with this tax. And then finally, that it needs to be sufficient. So Katie talked about the 3 legs of that stool. This is the third leg, and we needed this tax to generate enough revenue to close that budget deficit. And so we held a roundtable with the members of the Community Funding Working Group, plus a few other stakeholders from the community, and they gave us some good direction on how to structure a potential tax, and you can see some of the feedback that they provided reflected here. A few things that I'll call out. One is that they directed us to explore variable rates and tiered structures that would reflect the diverse property types across the city. So said another way, we wouldn't want a tax that would necessarily tax something like a Salesforce tower at the same rate as a mom and pop business on a commercial corridor. We also wanted to find a structure that would avoid disproportionate impacts on certain types of property owners or residents, such as renters, small businesses, and lower income households. Some of the other feedback was to maintain the value of the tax over time, so look at inflation adjustments, and then also to seek additional revenue beyond just closing that operating gap. There was a lot of enthusiasm for going kind of above and beyond with the tax and generating enough revenue to potentially expand service, not just kind of maintain what we have. And then, again, kind of looking at multiple tiers for larger residential and non-residential properties. And so this is the exciting part. This is the details of the tax structure itself. And this was announced publicly a few weeks ago. You may have seen in the news, but I'll kind of lay out some of the key details for you here. First of which is that you can see reflected on this slide, these are the residential parcel rates. So the top portion of the table here is the single-family residential parcels, and that base rate of $129 is kind of a flat rate that applies to all properties, all single-family properties of 3,000 square feet or less, and that encompasses about, I believe, about 85% of single-family parcels across the city. So the vast majority of folks are going to be paying that flat $129 rate. And then we have a couple of marginal tiers above that for properties that are larger than 3,000 square feet, and those are assessed based on the actual square footage, so dollars per square feet. And then at the bottom there are the multifamily parcels, and so you can see there we have a flat rate for all multifamily parcels with properties of 5,000 square feet or less. Those are paying $249 flat rate. And then for the properties above 5,000, they're paying a rate of 19.5 cents per square foot, up to a maximum of $50,000 so that no multifamily property is paying more than $50,000. And that really only applies to the very largest residential buildings in the city. And then here's the structure for the non-residential parcels. So similar to the multifamily, the first 5,000 square feet has a flat rate of $799, and then kind of moves upward from there with the marginal rates that you see on the screen here, going all the way up to a maximum of $400,000 on the commercial side. And I do just want to call out that these are marginal rates, so it works similar to an income tax where it's sort of each tier kind of stacks on top of each other. So the last one that you see there, 250,000 plus, that 99 cents per square foot only applies to square footage above 250,000 square feet. And then for a few other kind of pieces beyond the rate structure itself that we wanted to mention here, we do have the mixed-use parcels. Those are essentially going to be treated like, and I should say the mixed use is only for commercial and residential mixed use. So they're, commercial mixed use. Those will just pay the regular commercial rate. But if they're commercial and residential, they'll essentially be treated as two separate buildings where they'll pay the residential rate on the residential portion and then the commercial rate on the commercial portion. And then we do have provisions for some exemptions and deductions. So we have a senior exemption built in where all senior owner-occupied single-family homes will get a full exemption. The senior owner-occupied multifamily parcels will get a deduction of $249 per unit. And then we also have a full exemption for all SRO units within any given parcel. And then we'll apply the same exemptions that property taxes apply for different uses like hospitals, museums, government-owned properties, those kinds of things. This is a 15-year tax, and it does have a CPI inflation adjustment built in. And then finally, for the pass-through, we are allowing rent-controlled units. Property owners can pass on up to 50% of the parcel tax with a cap of $65 per unit, which equates to about half of that single-family home rate. And then this is just kind of a reflection on where we've kind of come over the last several months, starting in May and working up to where we are now in early 2026. We're actively drafting the legislation, which should be done here very soon. And I think that is all we have for you today, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for the presentation. Member Ortega.
Hello. Thank you so much for trying to make that simple. I'm sorry to say it is not simple. The actual feedback that I want to provide is I'm very, very worried about adding a parcel tax on top of the half-cent to 1 cent regional sales tax on the ballot this year, given the high cost of inflation, the job insecurity, the current market, all of that. So I think it's not that I'm against this. I want to be very clear about that. I am worried that the percentage that we are going to need is going to be very hard to get. But I appreciate you guys coming here. That took 10 to 15 minutes to explain. And I don't think as many people are as diligent as this group on reading the fine details of a parcel tax. I think that's something I would really... I don't know how to get it so that the populace of San Francisco understands this in a way. I'm just worried that the gut reaction by a lot of people who vote is going to be, yeah, that's important, but we can't have more taxes, right? don't know if that's true, but I was talking about some of these measures at work, and a lot of people were like, they want to raise the taxes. It's already so expensive. Now listen, it's important, but I worry about that. And I actually think that what you've proposed makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very equitable based on what you've said. So I want to commend you guys on doing what seems like a very fantastic job with a very tough cookie. That does actually lead me to a question, which is, based on the nice graphs you provided, there's about $150 million that we're going to need next year. What is the projected revenue of this parcel tax if it was to pass? I just didn't see it. Maybe I missed it. It was where was it? Sorry, you just have like a bar graph, so I just want the actual number on the presentation. You had like the local measure, and it looked like 150 million, but I wasn't quite sure. I guess if you could just send me the like spreadsheet with the numbers of how much you calculated would be with, because you have all the parcels and you have the exemptions and all that other stuff. I just appreciate seeing the actual numbers, not just a pretty picture that doesn't have any numbers on it. Is that possible?
Yeah. Thank you for your feedback, and we can absolutely share that with you. We can. I don't know if I can bring it back up, but it shows how much it'll generate. 150 million for community operations to close the gap.
Yeah, I see like a graph. It was just
no
big.
problem. Yeah, it's.
And because I was also curious about what inflation rate you had in there.
It's the CPI. It's our
the standard.
Yeah.
The standard. Yeah. This is what it was. It was like it looks like it closes, but I just want to see the math.
Yeah, I can see how that's
Because it just wasn't very clear to me. It's like yes, it closes it, but anyway, like I said, I think it's like if I'm gonna vote for this, I really want to understand how it's actually gonna close the gap and how you think that it's gonna close the gap in actual numbers, not just pictures. But that's me. I'm strange like that. Anyway, yeah, I think that is the thing. That is my feedback. I would really think about how you guys can present this so that every single person in San Francisco can not only understand how it works, but isn't scared of it. Because I'll be really honest, the first time I had to file taxes by myself, I was so confused and like really sad they didn't teach this in high school for me. And I did not understand how income tax works. And it took like 3 years before someone bothered to finally explain it to me, which is partly of myself, but it was April 14th and I had to get the taxes done. So I hope I filed the paperwork correctly. I'm worried that people are going to look at the ballot the day before and not have any idea of how to understand. Which, again, this group, fantastic. They really educate themselves. It's wonderful. I just would work on a presentation that the people that are not this wonderful, amazing group, and one of you guys who have a clear understanding of how tax policy works, can digest it.
Member Bars.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation and staying late with us. I really appreciate it. I have to, okay, so I am generally supportive of these kinds of funding measures, and generally the people in my district are too, with some exceptions. However, I will say that I've recently heard some commentary about being more concerned about oversight and how do we know that we're getting, the service we're buying with this measure as well as the regional funding measure. I think it's come up more with the regional funding measure, but I've heard echoes of it with the local one as well. So I'm curious to know, I'm curious to hear your response to how SFMTA can show that like the money will be well spent and meet the needs of like my District 7 constituents. And the second thing that I'd like to ask, which is related, is that on that chart, I see the agency efficiencies like quadrupling in 5 years. And I'm really curious to know how. like genuine question. How are we going to quadruple efficiencies in 5 years' time? So those are my two questions.
I'll take the first one first, which is the accountability piece. And so just speaking specifically to this measure, the accountability and the oversight are, like, as we are in the timeline, we're currently drafting the legislation, and so those are actually still being decided and developed. So there's nothing public on how we're, so it's still in the structure is public, but there are still components that are still being negotiated. That's why it's not included in this, but there will be. In terms of the efficiencies, so this is a little bit out of my bailiwick. I think that if, we just recently had a board presentation on efficiencies, I think on January 6th. So we have a lengthy presentation on what we're currently doing, or what we've done, what we've completed in terms of efficiencies, and what we have proposed. But I think the sense is that we're not finding one-time efficiencies, we're finding efficiencies that actually grow. And we also have to be steadfast in finding efficiencies and how we can cut costs. And so that is, it's not a one-time exercise. It is something that we are going to have to do every single year. But I think the sense of how it's growing so much is because a lot of the, I think Bree would be able to explain this better, but the efficiencies that we choose, it's not just a one-time cost savings. It's if we reduce something, we're actually receiving the benefits over time.
Okay, so there's some sort of structural inefficiencies or opportunities for cost savings that we've identified, and those
not even that we've identified. I'd say we are in the process of still even identifying more. This is a work to be done.
Okay.
That must be done.
A big number.
It's a lot.
Okay, thank you.
I would add something that kind of addresses both portions of your question, which is that under SB 63 for the regional measure, we are going to be undergoing an efficiency study from a third-party consultant who's going to help us identify what they call early action strategies to help also contribute to these efficiencies that you're seeing. So I think there are things that we're doing right now in-house to try to identify those, and then there will be more after, if SB 63 passes the regional measure this fall. There will be more work that is done next year for that.
Thank you.
Member Ford.
Hi. I think just because of the rules on passing tax measures, this would have to be a ballot initiative from signature collection, not via the mayor putting it on and the supervisors putting it on the ballot. Is that the plan? And then the other question I had is, are any fair revenue actions in the planning? I saw the parking revenue line, but I notably did not see any fare increases or monthly pass changes. The price of a car is a lot. Once you decide to buy that car, you're not coming back to the bus. But you can go from a $250 to a $350 fairly much easier than going from a $250 or an $85 muni pass to a $200 car payment. It's managing that and keeping the riders that I'm wondering how we're thinking about that with the working group.
So with respect to your first question, what I can tell you is that if the measure is put on the ballot by the mayor or the board of supervisors, it requires a certain threshold. If the measure is put on the ballot by through Citizens Initiative, it requires a lower threshold. We are here to talk about the structure of the tax, and I can talk to you about what's in it and the development, but what happens after is not part of our purview. And then with respect to fair revenue, I mean, that, I think everything, kind of going back to that efficiency lines, Sarah, that you mentioned, you know, everything, there are a lot of, you know, policies, revenue policy, internal revenue policies on the table that are, you know, under consideration. I can't speak to all of them, unfortunately, but I know that we are looking under all the couch cushions for money to close our gap.
Vice Chair Daniels.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. Just after listening to my co-members of the CAC comments, I just wanted to encourage you. I see that on your slide that you're going to have a second work group meeting, and I know that labor is involved. And I would encourage you to let labor's voice be loud in the room, because a lot of the comments that are being brought up, the concerns about how the voters are going to react, labor has already thought of this, because this is their lifeline. This is like people's lives, people's jobs, people's retirement. So please, like, listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you. We, can I respond to that? So we had 2 roundtables where we invited folks from the community. SEIU was there, TWU was there, and the SF Labor Council were there. So they were very involved in the structuring and the negotiation of the proposed structure, and we continue to have close conversations with them. I have personally had very, actually great conversations about their direct, you know, feedback was incorporated into the structure. So I appreciate that, and we are paying attention, and yeah, important.
Thank you both so much for the presentation and the tremendous amount of work that I know you both and a lot of other people in the agency have put into this. I have one really simple question piggybacking off of Member Ortega, which was the most recent article I had seen about this projected, I believe, $183 million annually. Has that projection change? I know there are like contingencies and things like that, but has the projection changed? Was it more like 150 million now? Because difference.
I think it's how you look at how the money flows into the SFMTA. So the total amount of revenue generated without exemptions is $183 million. The SFMTA will not receive $183 million because of the senior exemption and the SRO exemption. So I think the way that we have been talking about it, because we don't want to mislead people, to let them, for them to think that we have $183 million to put towards our transit problem, because we don't. Because we won't see a large portion of that. We will have $150 million to put forward to fill our gap. We'll have about $10 million available for muni improvements, which we, you know, committed to, and then the remainder we'll be able to use to administer the tax. So it's not $183 million towards the gap. It's still that 150, but we had to be able to, like, we're not going to see like the money that never comes in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that the overall projected revenue had not changed.
It's a great question. I think that we're trying to share it in this way so we don't mislead folks.
I see. Okay, thank you so much. I think to Member Ortega's point, it would be helpful to make that number more prominent in the presentations. Thank you so much. There are no other questions or comments from members. Is there any public comment in the room on this item?
Thank you, Edward Mason. There's a process improvement within Muni that I've observed that should probably be considered, and that's the employee shuttle buses that run empty that I observe at 24th and Mission BART station. And when I see those buses come by, I say, there's about $350 an hour probably to operate that bus, and it's operating empty. Now, I will say, I did see one time at a different time of the day, one person on it, that you know, because I go grocery shopping once a week, and I was late, and so I saw one person. And another time I saw one person 10 o'clock at night when I was coming home, and the employee shuttle was there. All the other times, these buses are empty. And I see the bus at the 22nd Street Caltrain station staging there. And I say, boy, that's a lot of money going up in the air. That's getting burned. So, and regarding the parcel taxes, I kind of agree with the general consensus. We're putting a sales tax and a parcel tax. Let's face it, the country is broke. And in my opinion, we're on the decline in the United States. So good luck with whatever we're trying to do. And I think just be prepared for some reduction in service from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there any remote public comment on this item?
There is no remote public comment for this item.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks again for the presentation and for staying with us so late. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to item 14, introduction of new business. Do any CAC members have any new business? Not seeing any. I think we can then move on to public comment. This is general public comment on items under the Transportation Authority CAC's purview that are not otherwise agendized at this meeting. Is there anyone in the hearing room wishing to give public comment? No? Great. Not seeing any in the room. Operator, is there any remote public comment?
There's no remote public comment.
Great, thank you so much. That puts us on item 16, which is adjournment. Thank you all. This meeting is now adjourned.